Honorable Minister of New and Renewable Energy, Dr. Farooq Abdullah, Honorable Minister of External Affairs, Mr. Salman Khurshid, Your Excellency Vice President of Seychelles, Mr. Danny Four, Your Excellency Mr. Kofi Annan, former Secretary General of the UN, my colleague Dr. Annapurna Vancheswaran, former President of Finland, Madame Tarja Halonen, former Prime Minister of Sweden, Mr. Persson, former Deputy Prime Minister of the UK, Lord Prescott, President of the Asian Development Bank, Mr. Nakao, Excellencies, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Nelson Mandela was right when he stated, and I quote, "Overcoming poverty is not a task of charity, it is an act of justice. Like slavery and apartheid, poverty is not natural. It is man-made, and it can be overcome and eradicated by the actions of human beings. Sometimes it falls on a generation to be great. You can be that great generation. Let your greatness blossom." End of quote. Lack of security in energy, water, and food bedevils the lives of hundreds of millions of human beings across the globe, even today, as we move forward in the 21st century, all of which defines the character of widespread poverty. Even now, there are 1.3 billion people who live without access to electricity, and twice that number dependent on biomass, often of poor quality, for meeting their cooking and space heating needs in ill-ventilated homes. Recent research has brought out not only the known drudgery associated with such an energy regime, such as women spending hours in walking several kilometers to collect a headload of fuel wood, but also serious health impacts of emissions from kerosene lanterns and biomass burning cook stoves. A large proportion of human society remains totally outside modern energy systems. In the case of water, projections vary substantially, but the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, in its fourth assessment report, projected that the population at risk of increasing water stress for specific scenarios is projected to be between 1.1 to 3.2 billion in the 2080s. As early as 2020, it is projected that 75 to 250 million people may be exposed to increased water stress due to climate change in Africa. In our part of the world, climate change-related melting of glaciers could seriously affect 500 million people in the Himalaya Hindu Kush region and 250 million people in China, all of whom depend on glacial melt for water supplies. Of course, climate change is only one factor that would influence future water stress, while demographic, socio-economic, and technology changes may play an even more important role. Estimates provided by the Food and Agriculture Organization indicate that nearly 870 million people were suffering from undernourishment in the period 2010 to 2012. We therefore have a serious challenge in respect of ensuring energy, water, and food security for all. Widespread poverty is the biggest barrier that prevents attainment of security in these areas. We need to keep in focus Nelson Mandela's view of poverty while mounting sustained efforts in that direction. And we possibly need an application of renewed ethics and values in dealing with the problem. The time has come when conventional solutions may need to be replaced by totally new and substantially different measures. Quite apart from policies and instruments by which change can be brought about, there are some fundamental issues that human society has to absorb and tackle head-on. I would like to quote two economists who I respect greatly and who left this world many years ago, but have left us with wisdom that we cannot afford to ignore much longer. It was Nicholas Georgescu-Roegen who wrote, and I quote, "The importance of natural resources in the life of our species is written on the face of history. The great migration that moved tribe after tribe from Asia to Europe during the first 1,000 years of our era was triggered by the exhaustion of soil nutrients after millennia of sheep grazing and overgrazing. All wars have been fought for the possession or the control of natural resources, even though, as a rule, the rallying cry was ideological. The limited wars that now do spring up in one place and then in another leave no doubt about this truth. End of quote. Another distinguished economist, Kenneth Boulding, who actually held the position of the president of the American Economic Association in 1968, perhaps the position that every economist in the US covets, stated, and I quote, "Anyone who believes exponential growth can go on forever in a finite world is either a madman or an economist." Elsewhere, Boulding also stated, and I quote, "The essential measure of the success of the economy is not production and consumption at all, but the nature, extent, quality, and complexity of the total capital stock," and I presume he was thinking about natural capital stock as well, "including in this state of the human bodies and minds included in the system," end of quote. The purpose of referring to these powerful thoughts from some of the most erudite and visionary economists of the 20th century is only to emphasize the fact that we cannot possibly treat the challenges ahead as those that require mere tinkering with the current system. We envisioned the Delhi Sustainable Development Summit to evolve as a platform and an institution that looks at least towards the end of the next quarter century in defining a path of development for human society that would help us meet some of our most daunting challenges. May I emphasize that any forum that focuses on merely economic prospects in the next quarter is doing disservice to the welfare of the human race, no matter how much glamour and how many celebrities it attracts. The presence of those individuals who have control of a large share of the world's economic activities might have us believe that the fate of humanity is in their hands and tied to the decisions they make. It is our vision and endeavor at TERI to see that DSDS focuses on the real problems and challenges ahead and not merely those that deal with business as usual. We offer the bewildering traffic and vibrant energy of the city of Delhi as our setting, and no ski slopes and the company of the super rich to attract you. But we solicit your presence here to stir up the soul of humanity, to focus on the challenges in the decades ahead and the solutions that we must collectively devise and implement to preserve all that we hold dear in our lives and on this planet. The truth is that we have very clear options and a limited period of time in which we need to act. In September 2013, the IPCC brought out its Working Group 1 report, which is part of the fifth assessment report of the panel. In that, we put forward the assessment that, for instance, limiting the warming caused by anthropogenic, human-induced CO2 emissions alone to less than 2 degrees Celsius since the period 1861 to 1880 would require that CO2 emissions from all anthropogenic sources to stay between 0 and as low as 790 gigatons since that period. An amount of 515 gigatons of CO2 was already emitted by 2011. So the space that's left is really very limited. Hence, human society has a limited amount of space and time in which it has to carry out stringent mitigation of emissions of greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide in particular, so that the Earth's climate can be limited to below 2 degrees Celsius. It is also obvious that if we delay action, the cost of stabilization will go up as the emissions and concentration of greenhouse gases continue to increase. The point that I would like to make before this August audience is that we cannot delude ourselves into believing that business as usual will help us solve some of our most serious problems, particularly in a world where, while the rich are doing rather well, the large numbers of poor people are left behind. It is significant that even in the US, the most powerful economy in the world, President Barack Obama, in his State of the Union address, stated, and I quote, "Today, after 4 years of economic growth, Corporate profits and stock prices have rarely been higher, and those at the top have never done better. But average wages have barely budged, inequality has deepened, upward mobility has stalled. End of quote. Undoubtedly, this is a State of the Union address that would be applicable to a large number of countries in the world, regrettably in India as well. We therefore have to look much deeper and find viable means by which perhaps transformative solutions can be devised and implemented with a sense of urgency and a deep sense of determination. The reason why we have instituted awards in the name of Nicholas Georgescu-Roegen is because his thesis on the entropy of the economic process is becoming apparent to us increasingly every day. We don't necessarily have to go through failure to learn, since science and knowledge should convince us of failure if we are heading towards it. Boulding rightly said, nothing fails like success because we don't learn from it. We learn only from failure. End of quote. If we have failed to provide a large mass of human society with security in respect of energy, water, and food, then it is time that we learn from the root causes of this massive failure. And knowledge can come to our assistance in this effort. Knowledge today and a clear perception of the future gives us an understanding of failure that we face without the misery of having to live through it. Decision makers, thinkers, and leaders from across the world need to consider whether merely dressing up the current system will solve the problem. In reality, there is clearly a need for both incremental as well as transformative changes. And in devising actions for the future, learning from experience generated in various parts of the world would be invaluable. As part of the events this week, TERI is also working with the University of California at San Diego and the California Air Resources Board to see how California's experience in bringing about improvement in air quality can be used in various parts of India. Over 4 decades, California reduced particulate emissions by about 90%, although the number of vehicles increased by 175%, and diesel consumption as well as miles traveled increased by 225%. We at TERI feel privileged that our founders set up this institute with the objectives of sustainable development and its various elements before there was awareness anywhere in the world on the subject of sustainable development. Today, TERI is perhaps the largest institution of its kind in the world, with a staff of over 1,200 professionals and activities stretching across the globe. We feel privileged to welcome such a distinguished galaxy of thought leaders and pioneers who have come here today to help the world in its mission to achieve sustainability and to assist TERI in its humble efforts to motivate and facilitate change in the right direction. It is a great privilege for me to welcome you on this occasion. Thank you very much.